Karen Pemberton stood on her manicured lawn at 6:47 am, clutching her HOA violation notice pad like a weapon of war, screaming at the moving truck blocking her pristine cul-de-sac. "This is a residential zone, not a loading dock," she shrieked, her voice cracking with the fury of 1,000 suburban injustices. The burly movers barely glanced her way as they continued hauling furniture into the house across the street, the house that had been blessedly empty for 3 months until today. What made her blood pressure spike even higher was the sight of the new neighbor, a tall man with military short hair directing the movers with crisp hand signals. He wore a simple black t-shirt, but something about his posture screamed authority. Karen's eyes narrowed. Military types were always trouble. They thought they could steamroll over HOA regulations just because they'd served their country. "Excuse me." She marched across the street, her heels clicking like gunshots on the asphalt. "I'm Karen Pemberton, HOA president of Willowbrook Estates. Your moving truck is in violation of Residential Parking Ordinance 4.7b. The man turned slowly, and Karen felt a momentary flutter of her knees. His eyes were steel gray, and when he looked at her, it was like being assessed by a predator. "Ma'am, we'll be done in 2 hours. 2 hours. Karen's voice pitched higher. "The maximum allowance for commercial vehicles is 30 minutes. I'm writing you a citation right now." She began scribbling furiously on her pad. "Ma'am." The man's voice remained eerily calm. "I'm Colonel James Mitchell, just retired from Fort Bragg. I suggest you check your HOA bylaws more carefully before." "I don't care if you're the President of the United States," Karen interrupted, her face turning an alarming shade of crimson. "Rules are rules. And another thing," she gestured wildly at the American flag the movers had just mounted by his front door. "That flag is 3 inches too large per Aesthetic Guidelines Section 12.3. A dangerous silence fell over the street. Even the movers had stopped to stare. Colonel Mitchell's expression didn't change, but something Arctic settled in his eyes. "The flag stays," he said quietly. Karen's triumphant smirk faltered slightly, but her HOA-powered righteousness quickly recovered. "We'll see about that. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tonight, 7 p.m. sharp. You will be there to answer for these violations, or I'll have the county sheriff enforce our liens." She turned on her heel, missing the knowing look that passed between Colonel Mitchell and his lead mover, a man whose own military bearings suddenly became obvious. As Karen strutted back to her house, already mentally composing her scathing email to the board, she failed to notice the small convoy of cars that had begun arriving on nearby streets. Men and women with familiar postures, watching her house with the patient attention of those accustomed to surveillance. Colonel Mitchell pulled out his phone and made a single call. "It's me. We have a situation." By 6:45 p.m., Karen had worked herself into a frenzy of righteous indignation. She'd spent the day researching every possible HOA violation, printed 17 pages of regulations, and even called her lawyer cousin in Tampa for ammunition. The emergency board meeting would be her masterpiece of bureaucratic warfare. She arrived at the community center 15 minutes early, expecting to find the usual gathering of her loyal board members. Instead, she froze in the doorway. The room was packed, not with her typical audience of 3 retirees and soccer mom Jennifer, but with at least 30 people she'd never seen before. Men and women with that same unsettling military bearing as Colonel Mitchell, all dressed in civilian clothes, but somehow still looking like they could snap her in half. What is this?" Karen stammered. Colonel Mitchell stood at the front of the room, no longer in casual clothes, but wearing his full-dress uniform, ribbons and medals catching the fluorescent light. "Mrs. Pemberton, I'd like you to meet some of my neighbors." "Your neighbors?" Karen's voice cracked. "That's right. It turns out quite a few veterans have moved into Willowbrook Estates over the past 2 years. Funny thing about military housing allowances, they make these houses quite affordable for retired service members." A woman in the front row, silver-haired but sharp-eyed, raised her hand. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez, retired. I live at 412 Maple Lane. I believe you cited my son last month for parking his motorcycle in our driveway." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She remembered that citation, a young man who'd said nothing while she lectured him about unsightly vehicles. "And I'm Captain Williams," said a man near the back. "You sent my wife a violation notice for hanging laundry on our back porch," said it was visible from the street through our privacy fence. The room began to murmur, and Karen felt the walls closing in. Each voice that spoke up revealed another veteran, another family she'd harassed without knowing their service background. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Mrs. Pemberton, we've done some research of our own. It turns out your interpretation of HOA regulations has been creative, particularly regarding American flag displays, which are protected under federal law." I was just enforcing the rules," Karen whispered, her usual bluster completely deflated. "Were you?" The colonel produced a thick folder. "Because according to these documents, you've been selectively enforcing violations. Funny how the Martinez family got cited for their garden gnomes, but the Johnsons' identical gnomes went unnoticed. The Johnsons happen to be major donors to your husband's business, don't they?" Karen's face went white. How could he possibly know about Dave's landscaping contracts? Master Sergeant Rodriguez stood up slowly. "We have a proposal, Mrs. Pemberton. You're going to resign from the HOA board tonight, and you're going to publicly apologize to every family you've harassed with your selective enforcement. And if I don't," Karen's voice was barely audible. Colonel Mitchell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then we start digging deeper into your HOA finances. Amazing what a group of people with security clearances can uncover when they put their minds to it." Karen looked around the room at faces that had gone from patient to predatory. These weren't suburban homeowners she could intimidate with regulations and threats. These were people who'd faced real enemies, real danger, and her petty tyranny was nothing more than an inconvenience to be eliminated. She began, then stopped. For the first time in years, Karen Pemberton had absolutely nothing to say. But as the meeting concluded and the veterans filed out with military precision, Karen caught a whispered conversation by the door. "Phase 1 complete. Tomorrow we start on the husband's business licenses." Her blood ran cold. What exactly had she stumbled into?